Welcome to Hybrid Work and the OHSA. My name is Tova Larson. I'm a consultant at Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. We're going to do some quick webinar housekeeping, and then I'll go ahead and do a little bit more of an introduction. So a couple of little heads up. One is that the audio comes through your computer and headphones are recommended. You could also do phone conference, that is available if need be. If your audio is not working, your camera is going to stay off, your mic will remain muted. All of the interaction that we have here in the room is going to come via the chat. So we'll be using it to answer questions, to participate in discussions, and be mindful that all of the messages are seen by all of the participants. In terms of our engagement features here in the room, we have some reactions. We can instantly engage. They float up on the screen, so I can see them floating up. We've got the thumbs up, we've got the clapping, we've got the heart. If I say something, you're like, oh, that's so good. We also have the laughing face emoji, and you may want to be using that one a few times. I do have some funny stories possibly that might drop along the way. And the one I see the most, especially with this session, is the emoji. Why? Because I have some mic drops here that might surprise the living daylights out of you. We've got polls as well. They are going to pop up in your chat. You select an answer, hit the submit vote button. Sometimes they also show up on your screen. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. If it pops up like in front of your face, just select an answer. If you choose to participate, hit submit, and then you can click close. If you choose to do it in the chat, it works the same way. Hit an answer, click submit, and you can just move on. The chat will stay in the chat, but you can just, you've done your part, right? The chat, you can message at any time. We do take questions throughout the session. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, do I have to wait until the end to ask my question? No, I may not answer your question right away, but I will be scrolling through the chat at the end for any questions that I may have inadvertently missed or that I was holding to the end. Especially if it's something that we're going to cover later in the program, sometimes I won't answer it right away. But I will try to make sure to the best of my ability that every question that goes into the chat at any time through the session gets answered by the time we head on out of here. Sound fair? Cool. We also have some accessibility features here in MS Teams. We can turn on live captions. You do that by hitting the three dots. That's the More menu. You go to Language and Speech, and then you turn on live captions. It's auto-generated, so it's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty good. And you can make the screen the full screen by hitting view and going to full screen. You'll lose being able to see the chat and being able to see my camera, but if you want bigger print, that's one way to get it. All right, so what is the goal of the Safety Connection? If you are new to Safety Connection, by the way, Safety Connection is the unsung hero of WSPS. They are prepaid, no cost sessions. They're fantastic opportunity for you to really learn and share and discover what's of value to you. When I'm talking about a particular topic in this session, you're like, that doesn't kind of really relate to us. It's totally fair. You're going to be able to pick out some nuggets of gold that you're going to be able to take back to work. Somebody else might have other different nuggets of gold that they think are absolutely the thing they're taking back. So it's really about figuring out what's most relevant to you. It's an opportunity to connect virtually with your industry peers. It's also an opportunity to share best practices. And I'll be asking you to share some of what's going on in your own workplaces as well through the session. And of course, you're attending from your own personal workspace, which everybody loves, right? And why? Because we have folks joining us from all over our beautiful province. And in fact, we have folks from other provinces as well. So this is a great opportunity to not only be able to join from your own workspace, but we wouldn't necessarily have a Safety Connection in person in every single one of your cities. So makes it really convenient, right, to get some great safety information. By the way, if you haven't already done so and you hopped on a little after 10:30, feel free to jump into the chat and let us know where you're joining from. We have folks joining us from, all across our beautiful province and from other provinces as well. I'm always curious where we have folks joining from. Good morning to Sam in Uxbridge. All right. So where did this session really start? This session started off with some conversations with our advisory committees. Our advisory committees at WSPS are industry leaders in a variety of sectors that work with WSPS to ensure that we're getting sort of the tea from what's going on in workplaces. Where are their challenges? Where are their pain points? What do our various industry sectors that WSPS serves, the agriculture, the service sector, and manufacturing sector, and broken out into more than a dozen advisory committees on sectors like tourism and hospitality. We have, there's the automotive sector. There's a whole bunch of different sectors that we serve. They have specific groups. And they say, what are some of your challenges right now? And one of the areas that was a major focus last year with our advisory committees was hybrid work. Big challenges with hybrid work. Okay. And that's part of the reason that this session came about. And the advisory committees identified a number of areas of concern. They identified areas around the employer and what do they need to provide in terms of physical workspace. If you have people working from their personal residence as well as from an office, what do you need to have? Should we have in terms of ergonomic concerns? They're like, well, how do we make sure that people are not just like working at a Little Tikes picnic table, right? What do we need to do for workplace inspections? How does this impact our JHSC? How does this influence our obligations around domestic violence? Because we know that we have a section in the OHSA that covers domestic violence. What does that look like in a hybrid format, right? Emergency response. What about on site? What about if they're working in their home office and somebody has a seizure on camera while they're on a meeting? What do we have to do for that? How do we prepare for this? These were very real concerns coming to us from a wide variety of sectors, which really showed that there was a need for WSPS to step in and provide some guidance. So before we move forward, I'm going to quickly introduce myself again. Hi, I'm Tova Larson. I work for Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. Some of you may have met me before on our wonderful Safety Connections. If you are new here, welcome. It's great to meet you. If you are someone who is coming back, it's great to see you again. I've been in the health and safety field now for 19 years. I did not start my career as a health and safety professional. I started my career as a laboratory chemist, and I got into health and safety because I got hurt at work. I've been with WSPS for 9.5 years now, and I provide a lot of Joint Health and Safety Committee training and certification. So I'm very deep into this, an understanding of like when I'm talking to people about what their pain points are, often I'm talking to them when they're coming to me for certification and they're sharing all of like what their biggest problems are. And this is hybrid work is still one. Fun fact about me, when I am not working, I am a ski patroller at a local ski hill, mostly volunteer, and it's an absolute blast. So whether you're like, you'd like twinge your knee and you just want to ride down to the bottom to, go meet up with the fam jam, or whether you are very seriously injured somewhere on property, our job is to find you, assess you, stabilize you, keep you alive, get you to a clinic, and get you connected with additional care, whether that be paramedics or a family pickup or what have you. So that's what I like to do for fun. Let's move forward and talk first about our first poll question. What is your organization's relationship with hybrid work? Are you not doing any hybrid work? Like you're 100% in person all the time, zero, not happening? Are you considering implementing it? Many organizations have obviously already implemented it. I think there are going to be a lot of folks in the room that have. Are you currently allowing hybrid, but you're struggling? Are you currently allowing it and you're managing well? Or are you already a leader in hybrid work arrangements? And I should also preface that when we look at WSPS, like I'm a hybrid worker. I'm mostly in my own house, but doing client-facing work. But I also do on-site work when I'm going to client sites. Very, very rarely. Like WSPS doesn't have an office in Ottawa. I am joining from beautiful, it's not sunny today, but it was sunny yesterday. Beautiful Ottawa. we don't have an office in Ottawa. So I'm not going into an office, but my version of hybrid is that I do on-site, remote work. All right, let's take a look at our poll responses. We have 2% who said they're all in office, no intention to go hybrid. That's also totally cool. If you're just coming here for coming here to learn something new, that's always amazing. 8% said they're considering it. 8% said they're struggling. 70% said they're allowing it and managing, and that's really great to hear. So what we're talking about here today may allow you to just be able to level up or give you some new ideas, right? And we have 11% who said that they're a leader in hybrid work arrangements, and I would love to hear from you in some of what you're doing in the chat that you're like, we're doing amazing, because this is also an opportunity for you to share what's really working for you. This is not just me yattering on. If you've got ideas or like wins, I would also love to hear about those as well. And you can show those. You can just drop those into the chat. Yay, Ottawa! Okay, so I'm looking at the chat, by the way. That's what I'm yattering on about now. We just started hybrid last week, so not sure. Totally fair, right? We're fully remote, but we use co-working spaces. We will talk about this. Marie, I've got your back on that. Allowing hybrids 3-day, office 2 days. That's my partner also works hybrid. He works for the federal government, and he's now like 3 in, 2 at home. And so, yeah, lots of different challenges. And we'll talk a little bit about even what some of his experiences have been, because I'm getting sort of the experiences coming home at the end of the day also. So tell us about your struggles. So some of you said you're doing really well. Some of you said you're struggling, and whether you are a leader or not, you may have areas that you're like, I feel like we're doing well, but these are the areas that I feel like we're weakest. So where are some of your pain points here? All right. So as I'm seeing the results come in, one of the top answers, and this is a multiple answer, so you can select more than one. Not sure how the OHSA applies. Absolutely fair. By the way, is there anyone here, and feel free to drop it in the chat if you're federally regulated, because there are some differences in terms of federally versus provincially regulated. We're going to be largely focusing on, at least in the OHSA component, on provincially regulated firms here in the province of Ontario. But if you are federally regulated, the application section does apply differently for the Canada Labour Code to the different working spaces. All right, so we have a mix of scenarios. Not all positions can work hybrid, and that's true, right? Like, there are logistical challenges. Sometimes you're like, okay, you can't work from home because this just doesn't work. How do you keep from resentment from those who can't work hybrid? Oh, that's such a great question. So one of the things that I definitely would suggest is to really delineate based on tasks and activities, and to, even if there are small opportunities for that person to be able to work from home, whether it is attending a webinar like this, whether it is attending a virtual training and doing that from home, where maybe you're doing it infrequently, it allows at least for them to get little tastes of that, right? Like if you're like, oh, well, Joan, who's a manager, is allowed to go and do her Joint Health and Safety Committee certification sitting on her couch, but you have to come and sit in the break room on a laptop while everyone else is eating lunch because we just say no. Like, that's not very practical, and you're probably going to get that person a lot more motivated to be in the course. They're going to have less distractions. Even looking for those little opportunities for them to be able to, maybe have those hybrid moments can help lessen the resentment, but also understanding that if they're doing hands-on tasks, like serving clients face-to-face, that's not always going to be practical. We're a 100% remote company, and then one day came to the office starting last week. Oh, wow, that is challenging. So some of the other challenges, and I look back at those poll results, not sure how the OHSA applies, is one of the top ones. Safety programs required. Supporting supervisors and managers. Yeah, that's a huge one. And I would love to do like an entire hour and a half just on that. For the folks at the Safety Connection, because I know you can hear me, Emily. We can talk about that. Um, Getting stuff, and I do have some resources, by the way, to share, including an article specifically about that. Managing communicating with staff was 9%. Getting staff to spend more days in the office, we will definitely talk a little bit about that. And if I don't dig into it as much as you like, feel free to reach out to me after this session as well. I'm going to give you like the 10-second version of that. You need to make the time in office actually valuable. One of the things that absolutely grinds my partner's gears is that he goes into the office because he has to, only to be in a like amorphous sea of other people sitting in like beige workstations. No one on his team actually works out of that building. His manager doesn't live in the area at all. His team is distributed across the country. So he goes in, he sits on Teams calls all day, he eats alone because he doesn't know anybody, he doesn't talk to anybody in person at all, and then has to get back on a bicycle and go home with his laptop because he cannot even leave the laptop, a bottle of like, hand sanitizer. He cannot leave anything at work. So he's lugging like a 30-pound backpack to and from on a bike or on transit, only to sit on Teams calls that he could have done in his house, and he hasn't talked to a soul. And he does that 3 days a week. If that is what your view of hybrid work should be, that is not awesome. The goal of getting people into the office, if you're trying to get people to really connect, you need them to actually be connecting with people that are going to be able to help them learn, grow, develop, be creative, and do their best work. And often that involves connecting with people they actually work with. So meetings in person, like that leads to lunches in person. It's about building relationships. But the work still underpins all of those relationships. So if there's no work in common, the relationships often don't form. So if you're thinking about doing hybrid, like telling people like, okay, our group is going to come in and sit in this particular little like bank of offices that day, on Wednesdays, that's how you build community. It's not just by sending people into the office for an arbitrary number of days to pick any desk out of 12 buildings to go and sit there. There you go. There's my version of that. And that's one of the big pain points. I'm seeing lots of really good stuff in the chat as well. So difficult to staff enough first aiders. We're going to talk about that. How do you review emergency plan? We're going to talk about that. So those are a few of my thoughts. I don't know. I saw a couple of like faces when they're like, yeah, he goes in, he spends all day on Teams calls, like on headphones. Is anyone else, is that happening in your workplace? Or is this, you're like, no, we actually go in and talk to each other? I don't know. But that's what his workplace looks like. And he rates it 0 out of 10. So what are we going to be talking about here in our program? We're going to talk about OHSA and private residences. We're going to talk about physical conditions. We're going to talk about emergency response, about OHSA duties in a hybrid context. We're going to talk about GHSCs and reps and violence in the lock zone. We're going to be digging into some best practices along the way, but one of the additional things we're going to do is talk about some new legislation for you to watch. So let's talk about application to private residences first. And when we look at the conversation we're going to have here today, oh my gosh, what if I call this in the Virgin Islands? Yep, I'm jealous. Okay, yeah, legitimate. How does come to work happen for him? I don't even know, right? I have a cousin who is living in Slovenia and was asked to come back to her office in Ottawa, and yeah, she opted to stay in Slovenia, so I don't know. Let's talk, though, we're going to make sure we're all using the same words here because there's a lot of different words for a lot of different stuff that's going on. So we've got working from home. That is where the owner or occupant is working where they are at their private residence. This is the place where they actually live. And this includes work that's performed on behalf of an employer inside of a private residence. And the language around private residence, we'll talk about it from an OHSA context in a few minutes. Working on site, this is where you are going to a site controlled by your employer or provided by their direct employer. So when we think about third-party co-working spaces, and we'll talk about those, we're talking about them as well. You're on site, it's space that's being provided by your employer to do so in some format or another. However, this excludes times when you are going and providing services on site as a contractor or subcontractor at a workplace controlled by a client. So when I go to a manufacturing facility to deliver certification as an in-person, like private session, that is, well, it is working on site. For the purposes of this, we're actually going to call that remote work. Okay. Hybrid work, we are going to define for the purposes of today's session as working part of the time in your private residence and part of the time working in a space controlled by your employer. I'm defining these terms because it relates back to when we talk about like requirements. I want to make the distinction between them. There is then remote work, where this is work that's being performed at a workplace as defined by the OHSA, to which the Section 3, Subsection 1 exemption around private residences does not apply. This is on-site work. This is typically at a workplace controlled by an employer, but not your employer. And this also includes work within residential dwellings where the worker is not an owner or occupant. So think about like a plumber, electrician, an HVAC person coming to service your equipment. They're still at work. That's not their private residence, and this matters a lot, but they are in your private residence. And this also includes things like field work. So I would love to know, where do your staff work from mostly? Are they working from home? Are they working on site? Are they working and select all of them. Are you doing work from home? Are you doing employer controlled site? Are you doing third party site? Are you doing remote work or travel for work? Interesting. Okay. Yeah. 40% have picked working home. This is a multiple answer, so pick all of them that apply. I didn't put a all apply, but just tick all four if that's the case. Oh, we'll be getting into Section 3, Subsection 1. I kept that deliberately vague. Is this the same as the webinar on May 9th? Possibly. You may not have been there for the if you didn't hear about the new legislative update, feel free to either tune out or come back at 11:30. ACD. 80% of our staff are working 100% from home, 20% choose to go to the office, which is also interesting because some workplaces just give you the choice, right, of where you work. So poll responses: working from home, 39% are just working from home. 34% picked working on site. Working on site at third-party spaces, 11%. That was a lot higher actually than it has been in the past. And 15% said they're doing remote site or travel for work. When I talk about remote site, I'm not just talking about up into the wild yonder, places that your biggest concern are the bears. We're talking about any time that you're on a site, as we defined, it's a workplace, but it's not one that your employer is responsible for. All right, so let's dig in. We have so is a home considered a workplace under the OHSA? Dump, dump, dump. It may be considered a workplace, but the OHSA does not apply to work performed by the owner or occupant in or about a private residence, and that is Section 3, Subsection 1. It literally reads, this act does not apply to work performed by the owner or occupant or a servant of the owner or occupant to, in or about a private residence or lands or appurtenances used in connection therewith. How does this relate back to the course? Your session here today? Folks that are working from home, the OHSA is not applying to your physical workspace. Does it still apply to the organization? Yes. Does it still apply to aspects of your work? Yes. But the actual physical space, and I'm in my home too, that is a cat tree, and I have 3 of them. The OHSA doesn't apply where I'm sitting right now. Is anyone surprised at this? If you are surprised, feel free to use the react, the like little surprise face. How many of you knew this before, by the way? Or is this new? Yes, yes, no, some people are surprised. Not even your immediate workstation? Nope. Ooh, we're going to be talking about, Ryan, about the Working for Workers Act. Don't worry. Um, this makes me happy. All right, so it's really interesting. However, there's something also really, really important to know as a giant, like, you're like, I don't have to provide anything. You wait. I've got you. Um, I thought the workstation was covered. It is not. Now, if you are federally regulated, this is not true. They define workplace as anywhere that a worker is working, anywhere that an employer is engaged in work for the employer, and they do not have a similar exemption. Now, all of that being said, the OHSA still does apply to your organization's policy and program requirements, despite the limitation of Section 3, subsection 1 that is focused on the physical workspace regarding the owner or occupant of a private residence. Your organization still does need to have a workplace violence program, a workplace harassment program. They still have to provide the occupational health and safety awareness training. They still have to provide the WHMIS training. And this is just when we think about working in a remote context. They still need to provide the training, the supervision. They need to provide, information. They still have to have, the organization still needs to build a safety program. Why? Because the exemption applies to the residence, to the physical workspace, but these requirements apply to the organization. And the organization, whether or not that organization is even headquartered in Ontario, they still need to make sure that you're getting Ontario specific information. So violence, harassment, they have to be Ontario compliant. The health and safety and 4 steps, you still have to do that. And the WSIB claims from employees who are working from home. Ooh, Sam, we're going to talk about that. Can we get a copy of the deck? Sorry, we don't share decks. But you'll be able to share a recording of this. We're recording this. And my level of enthusiasm on Monday morning. All right, so WSIA. Sam, here's what's really interesting about the private residences exemption in the OHSA. There is no similar exemption in the WSIA. For insured workers, the WSIA insurance plan applies to every worker who is employed by a Schedule I employer or Schedule II employer. However, it does not apply to workers who are persons whose employment by an employer is of a casual nature and who are employed otherwise than for the purposes of the employer's industry, nor does it apply to people whom articles or materials are given to be made up, cleaned, washed, or adorned, altered, finished, repaired, adapted for sale in a person's own home. So we would consider that to be home work, but that's home like manufacturing work. We're talking like making doilies and things like that. That is not that provision under Section 11, subsection 1, clause B of the WSIA does not apply for folks that are working. And most of the time when we talk about hybrid work, we're talking about people that are sitting in front of a computer. That exemption does not apply. So how does this sum up? The WSIA does apply to people that are working in their own home, even though the OHSA does not. So that means that if someone is working in their own home and they are injured in the course of their employment, even though the OHSA may not have mandated you in what you needed to provide, at the end of the day, your organization is still going to end up paying for that because that claim would likely be allowed. If they're injured their employment working from home, it is still a valid WSIB claim. Again, anybody surprised? Is anyone surprised that the WSIA can apply in a place that the OHSA does not? Yeah, I'm seeing some reactions here. Yes. So the WSIA does not, it also does extend past the workstation. Yes, Robin, if I am carrying a box of work materials, from I training materials, I do a lot of training. I'm carrying a box in from my front step and I trip and I, sprain my ankle. That's a work activity. I would still be able to put a claim in for that. If I'm like walking my cats on a leash outside during lunch, well, no, it's not a work activity. Also, if anybody knows how to leash train a cat, feel free to hit me up. All right, just applies while getting coffee and going up the stairs to use the washroom. You're going to have to, presumably, if you're drinking coffee, you're going to use the washroom. And those are, when we look at what's reasonable in terms of work activities, I like to say every claim is its own special snowflake. The particulars of each claim are adjudicated on their merits and on their details. Generally speaking, yes, getting up and going to get a glass of water or coffee drinker would be considered, that would still be a work activity. If I was in an office and I needed to get water or coffee, I would go to I want to say water machine, but probably a sink and go get some water. Those are activities that are still reasonable within the realm of what we would do in an office space. Like at some point, I'm going to have to use the restroom. By going and walking my cat, not a work activity. So I tripped and fell on my way to the washroom. Can I make a claim? Yes. You don't need a witness to witness the fall for a fall to be real. Like if you show up at an emergency room and your ankle is sprained or your ankle is broken, you have some medical evidence to say, hey, I'm injured, this happened. Even in cases where workers are working alone, remember, whether you're working at home or whether you're not working at home, there are lots of situations where workers are injured, in some cases extremely grievously so, where there isn't somebody to witness it. There is no requirement under the WSIA rather, that to make a WSIA based claim that you have to have a witness for the injury. Does the workplace violence policy need to be posted at a home location? Ooh, no. But we'll also talk a little bit about postings and some of the options. Yeah, you can have a virtual OHS board, and we will talk a little bit about that. This also makes it difficult for the employer to investigate WSIB-related incidents in private dwelling. Investigating is not always necessarily going to the scene. If you are working in a home context, somebody could take photos and provide them. If there was a condition in the workplace that contributed, but we know that if somebody, trips over their feet in office and falls, there's not necessarily always a lot to look at there either, right? So you can still investigate. Often the investigations are more based on, documentary evidence, speaking to the injured worker, perhaps getting photos of the area if they were pertinent, but you still definitely can investigate the circumstances. All right, so in terms of employer responsibilities for the physical conditions of the home office and the home itself, the employer does not, because the OHSA doesn't apply, the employer responsibilities related to the physical environment and at the residence. So at that front door, you're no longer responsible for what's happening inside the space. That being said, because the employer does not have control or oversight over that workspace, but that being said, the worker responsibilities actually remain intact. So workers who are responsible for their own personal workspace in their private residence, they still have an obligation to make sure that their workspace in their private residence is in good working condition, that the tools are in good working condition, that they're not creating hazards like cords across the floor, or that they're not sitting in like a episode of Hoarders where they have major issues with, fire egress, pests, any of these major hazards that can happen in those scenarios. They're also still responsible for their own behavior and their own actions. So if a worker is working in an unhealthy or unsafe way, that of course goes right back to section 28, subsection 2, duties of things that workers are not allowed to do, like, putting themselves or others at risk. Those are still behavior-based safety elements that do apply to workers when they are in their private residence. In terms of home offices, because the OHSA doesn't apply, there are limitations to what's enforceable by the ministry, and that's the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development regarding tools and supplies in a private residence. However, as an employer, I would urge you to conduct a risk assessment and to address ergonomic hazards, especially for folks that are working in computer type work, to prevent injuries, because while we just talked about WSIA and WSIB in a home context, the reality is that the dollars that you spend addressing ergonomic hazards when for the work from home component of your hybrid work scenario, that will pay dividends in the back end with a reduction in the number of injury claims. And we know that in Ontario, musculoskeletal disorders are number one in terms of claim numbers by a mile. Like 43% of all of our lost time claims involve musculoskeletal disorders. And the next closest is slip, trip, fall at 22%. So we're talking about like virtually double. The numbers speak for themselves. Invest in making people comfortable and ergonomically appropriate. Additionally, if the employer is providing equipment, so my employer provides me with a laptop, they provide me with a cell phone, they need to make sure that what they're providing to me meets other codes and standards. In this case, the Ontario Electrical Code and the CSA standards, ELC, ULC. You don't want to go buy somebody a laptop off of, I'm looking at you, Temu and Wish, not only because it's probably a security concern, but also if these devices don't have the applicable marks to indicate that they are in fact legal to plug into an electrical system in Canada, if and when they light on fire, your organization, when we look at the Ontario Electrical Code and the fire marshal finds that that Temu laptop was the thing that lit your, staff person's house on fire, they may come back looking at you and saying, why are you giving them equipment that does not meet applicable standards? Does not meet electrical fire building code. In this case, it would be electrical code. All right, third-party workspaces, provision of equipment. This is not a personal dwelling. So the OHSA exemption does not apply. That's section 3, subsection 1. The OHSA requirements for employers remain intact to maintain a safe workplace, to maintain the equipment. Often you're doing that through a third party. But all of this is identical, whether this is a space that is owned and leased by your employer, e.g. like more of a traditional office, or whether you're doing it using the WeWorks of the world. The employer has to ensure that adequate ergonomic provisions are in place. Now, when we look at what's legislated into the OHSA, we do not have anything in the OHSA that talks about ergonomics, but it does fall under section 25(2)H, every reasonable precaution, and it also comes back to some of the ministry guidelines, and the ministry does have a guideline on office ergonomics. When employers even when employers did not make provisions for the space, the employer still has an obligation to make sure that the worker is working safely, and this also includes working alone. So if you have staff that are going in, like they may be working in this space, but they may not have other staff from your company working with them. They are working alone, and you still need to have a plan for that. And if you are dealing with third-party workspaces, one of the absolute hot tips that I have for you is you need to have a means for your staff to be able to communicate concerns about the physical equipment, hazards that they find in that workspace back to you in a way that it's going to be able to get back to the third-party space provider. Because they can scream into the void all they want about a broken chair, but if they scream at you and you have no way of being able to get that back to that particular provider's staff, it's a hazard that's not being controlled, right? And it's going to be there forever until somebody complains about it. All right, just hopping into chat quickly. Are we expected to physically inspect co-working spaces? Ooh, we'll talk about that. Is working at home considered working alone? Absolutely. Yep. You're working alone. when we think about like risks of working alone, there's obviously the violence risk, but there's also the medical risk where like if I'm on camera with you right now, like what's to stop me from like, what just happened to me? Did I have a heart attack? Did I have a seizure? Did I go unconscious? Did I have a blood trigger event? Who knows? If I'm working alone and that happens to me and you don't have a plan for that, that's not great. And if you think, how often does this really happen? It happened to a good friend of mine. He was sitting in a call with his manager and he had a seizure on camera. 45 minutes later, he woke up to discover that the police had punched his door in. He was surrounded by paramedics and firefighters because his manager had gone and grabbed his emergency contact information and his address and called 911 for him. These are the things that I want you to think about. Managers need to check in. I would say check in or check to see this person is checked in at least once a day. You don't have to be micromanaging people, but if you're getting signs that something is wrong, or you are physically on camera with someone and you notice that someone is suffering a medical emergency, you need to be ready for that. Oh my gosh, Jacqueline. Yeah, I hope your friend is okay. That's tough, right? These are things that can happen and we need to be prepared for them. And we'll talk about that. So some of the better practices, determining primary and secondary workplaces. That is one of the very first places that I would start for a hybrid program. What's primary, what's secondary? For me, my primary workspace is here. For my partner, his primary workspace is now, it was at home. It is now in the office where he's 3 days a week, but he doesn't have a desk. So how do we manage that? We manage that with hoteling stations. And well-designed hoteling stations, not just like go sit at a table. Where do we want to invest our money? Invest in the primary workspace for personal ergonomics where necessary. Some people also have accessibility needs, and we need to be sure that we're providing accessibility in both workplaces, whether it's, when we think about in office and at home, if they're doing hybrid, we need to ensure that people are set up for success. We also want to ensure that people are set up for comfort and productivity. My absolute worst days, the days that I, I'll sit for an hour at my, I'll take up my laptop, I'll take it to the kitchen table, or I'll take it to the dining room table. I'm reminded every single time that I'm getting nothing accomplished and I should just go back to my desk because I'm not comfortable. All the desks are too tall. I'm 5'2". We want to provide adjustability of our hoteling stations. If you're not assigning people to particular workstations, adjustability is key. And this allows you to ensure that everyone can set themselves up for success. We also want to provide an external monitor. Do not rely on a tiny little monitor screen on your laptop. A docking station, a laptop. Those are the things that I would have, and peripherals. That's what I would have in an office setting or in a primary workstation if the primary workstation is at home. For those of you that are doing mostly like remote work, working at home. I think I just broke the fourth wall in this, but we're not remote work as I defined it. But if you're working from home and that's what you're doing most of the time, we want to make sure that we are that we're setting up that workstation as their primary workstation. If you're doing in office most of the time and staff are doing some work from home, the absolute bare minimum that you need to make someone comfortable is a laptop riser, an external keyboard, a mouse, and I recommend wireless for all of them. Absolute bare minimum, and it works. There are little keyboards that you can carry around. A mouse isn't very big. Laptop riser they can leave at home. Doesn't have to be expensive. I've even used a shoebox as a laptop riser in the past. Those are opportunities to be able to get the laptop up to a better spot. And because you can't stick on a laptop riser and actually type, that's the external keyboard is for. You're going to get 80% of the way there. For someone only working 2 days a week, they're only exposed to maybe 2 days a week at home. Between the adjustability of the hoteling stations at work, the big monitors, and then a couple of days that they're working at the laptop riser with their peripherals, you're going to get a good mix where the likelihood of musculoskeletal disorder is still relatively low. Does your organization actually provide ergonomic tools? Feel free to drop that in the chat. How do we address privacy and confidentiality concerns around home addresses? That's a great question. So what I would always do is to, don't provide home addresses to everybody, but be sure that you have a way to contact someone who does have the home address, whether it is, you've got like somebody who's always on your Teams chat representing HR, where there's sort of, you've always got that representation. That way you can get help in a timely manner. It may be that you're going to go back to their manager, or that just the managers have access to home addresses, or just directors have access to home addresses. Keep the information in, obviously need to know. We use like ADP has my home address in it, but only my manager and like HR can see it, not my colleagues. That's what I would do. But if you spot somebody in medical need, how are you going to get their home address? That is one way that we can get that home address. But when working alone, there are regular check-ins. Yep. In your working alone policy, there are lots of places that don't have a working alone policy at all. So I would assume that policy would apply working. Yep, it does. If you're working at home. How is this practical? If someone had a heart attack at home and they're home alone and need medical help in minutes, the implication of this is the manager needs to check in every 15 minutes. Absolutely not. I did not say that, nor do you need to. Nor do you need to necessarily provide a man down alarm. I think my point is not that you have to provide someone with immediate medical aid at all times continuously for the entire time that they're working. But if they are on camera with you and you notice this, obviously it's going to be very distressing for the person seeing this, that if they're unable to help or you don't have a way to be able to get them help. There are also obviously signs that there may be something wrong and that a well-being check may be required. Let's say that you have someone who's going into a meeting and they don't show up. And you start pinging them on Teams and they don't show up. And you try maybe phoning them, and or then their manager tries phoning their personal phone and then they're still MIA. At what point are you going to say, we're going to call their emergency contact in the HR software that's there for them? And then maybe that person goes and checks on them, or that person says, wow, like maybe we should call 911. Those are the kinds of things that I would look at. You aren't necessarily going to be, and even in an office setting, the reality is that if someone has a medical emergency, not everyone notices right away. One of the saddest cases in the last couple of weeks that I've heard came from a bank in the United States where a worker died at their desk and they were there for 4 days before their colleagues noticed. Mind-blowing and wildly unacceptable. That is, you want more well-being checks than that. Does that mean that you need to check in on somebody every 15 minutes? No. No, you don't. I like this take on primary workstation. Yeah, in our case for hybrid, it would be a perk for workers to have flexibility so they could, they could choose to work from home, and we would not be obligated to mirror the setup. Yeah, you're definitely not obligated to mirror the setup. I think that the spending the money where they do most of their work is really the best approach here. Yeah, some places offer ergonomic reimbursements. One challenge with that is just make sure that what they're getting is actually ergonomically appropriate. Some people will like stuff because it's pretty, but it's not actually good for their body. Yeah, there's no requirement to do that. Perfect. Yeah, we require approval before purchase. That's good. And some people are going to get really good quality, comfortable stuff. A couple of the other high-level best practices before I move on to the next section. Do create policies that require staff to maintain a healthy and safe office environment. And if people don't want to do that, or you discover that their home is not safe for them to be in for whatever reason, then you can direct them back to the workplace, either temporary or permanently. Establish good ergonomics programs that have provisions for hybrid based on primary and secondary workspace. Provide staff with a rolling bag to transport small equipment between locations if they are, especially if they're having to do like an official hybrid role and you're having them bring like their laptop and their keyboard and all of their stuff rather than having a backpack, have a rolling bag if possible. Ensure that staff have a policy mechanism to report damage or deficiencies, both at your workspace and in the co-working space world, and ensure that staff do have access to their supervisor. That can be by Teams, that can be by phone, that can be by email, but they need to be able to, if they have something going on that's really that they need help with, they still need to be able to access that help. So we've already, given a preview of this section. Emergency response. The OHSA does not apply to physical condition, and we've talked about that around private residences. What's interesting, though, is in terms of residential occupancies under the fire code, residential occupancy is where somebody is sleeping, they've got sleeping accommodations, where for these residents are provided, and they're not in some sort of a special care or treatment facility or involuntarily detained. Residential unit means a suite that's operated as a housekeeping unit at your home. And it's used or intended to be used by one or more persons, and it's got cooking, eating, living, sleeping, and sanitary facilities. Now, when we look at the emergency plans requirement, there are a number of occupancies that require emergency plans, and they do include some residential type occupancies, many of them congregate settings, but it also does include business and personal services occupancies. So that would be an office type occupancy, exceeds 300. Mercantile occupancy, again, exceeds 300. When we look, though, at buildings that contain 4 stories or more above or below grade, there is also a requirement for emergency plans. That being said, you might not know that there is, yes, you'll be able to get a recording of this later, no such term exists as fire warden in the in the Ontario Fire Code. So for all of you saying, we need to get our fire wardens together, I mean, that's a good idea, but do you actually have to? There's no word fire warden, so kind of no. Yeah, people talk about them a lot, but they're kind of not, at least from a legislative standpoint. I mean, they're real, but they're kind of not real. So what does the fire code actually say? It says that as an organization, you need to provide for the appointment of supervisory staff to carry out fire safety duties. Supervisory staff doesn't necessarily mean they're a supervisor under the OHSA. It just means that there's somebody who's capable of carrying out the fire plan in case a fire occurs. There are exceptions for care and residential and detainment occupancies. So this is, if you're in a retirement home, you can take all of this with a giant grain of salt. You still have to do all of that stuff. But the reality is that in office type occupancies, supervisory staff could be your security staff, it could be your commissionaires, it could be like a handful, that one manager that shows up five days a week, and they're not even required to be in the building at all times. So yeah, your fire wardens, you kind of don't necessarily need to have those in an office. So the Niagara during COVID learned how to run his business from home. So he sold his building, gave all the staff $5,000. Wow, to set up their home offices, and now rents a conference room for his monthly meetings. He saves a ton on utilities, and WSPS did exactly the same. We now have a very small office in Mississauga, but we don't have an office in Ottawa anymore. And we did it to ensure that we can take more of our budget and use it to provide health and safety services to our member firms. We actually inventory all home equipment in an HR file. That's also a great idea. I like that. We're adding all security guards as fire wardens. I think that's a great idea too. There's also nothing that says that when we think about first aiders, we'll talk about that. Tell us how your organization in the chat, and then I'm moving on, but tell us a little bit. You can chat chat in the chat about how your organization is managing supervisory duties under the OHSA, or Ontario Fire Code rather, for your on-site workspaces. You also do need to have some provisions in place for people with disabilities, by the way, who may not be able to use a staircase. So if you haven't thought about that one, that's also an important component. Fire extinguishers. There's nothing in the Ontario Fire Code that requires a residential occupancy to have a fire extinguisher. I would highly recommend you to get one if you don't have one. My family home has nearly burnt, not the house I live in now, but my childhood home has nearly burned down twice, 2 times. One started by my mom, one started by my dad. And fire extinguishers saved our house from burning both times. Since home offices are exempted, though, from an employer side, you have no obligation to provide extinguishers or training or electrical or gas or structural upgrades or repairs to the home at all. That being said, I would encourage you to have a policy that says that your employees, your workers, are going to maintain their home in accordance to electrical, building, and fire codes if they want to work at home in them, and then have them sign off on that. There's also no regulatory requirement for a fire safety plan in a residential occupancy unless the occupant load exceeds 10. And if they are living in a condo or a high-rise residential building, it's the landlord or the owner of the building that's responsible for the safety fire plan, not the employer of some random person living in apartment 1701. So some best practices for fire safety and building safety: make sure that you are ensuring that your staff are signing off that they are maintaining their building to the electrical, building, and fire codes. Staircases of 4 stairs or more need to have handrails. Emergency egress requirements, like I've got a front door and a back door, and unsurprisingly, you can walk out both of them at any time if needed. They are not blocked or hindered by objects. Pathways have to remain clear and unobstructed. That's very reasonable to expect of your staff. Working smoke detectors, that's a fire code requirement. If you don't have a smoke detector in your home, your employer absolutely can tell you to go work from the office. I think it's very fair to ask people to have a smoke detector. Similarly, it's absolutely expected that someone will have a carbon monoxide detector if they have carbon burning fuels in the home. There's the details of which are found in section 2.16.1.1 of the Ontario Fire Code. Some people may not actually need to have a carbon monoxide detector if they don't have any carbon burning homes and fuels in the home at all, but smoke detectors are required for everybody. In terms of some best practices, if you do opt to have fire wardens, one of them is to determine who's going to be physically present in the office on a given day. You could use swipe cards or RFID systems, or even just a paper sign-in book to find out who's in the office that day so they can check people off. Ensure that at least one manager on site, and you could assign them to the duty of just doing that fire sweep. Do ensure that all of your staff are having in-office training on emergency protocols. So what that means is that in order to work in that building, my partner can work in one of 6 different buildings. He has to do where are the emergency exits? Where's the first aid kit situation for that building before he can book a desk there, which is totally reasonable. You could also create or use one of the kind of marked as safe apps on your phone, where if there was an emergency in one of your sites, that it pings all of your corporate cell phones and then people mark themselves as safe. Reg 1101 also does not apply to private residences, so you don't have to give people a first aid kit, except if they are working in a there are workers traveling in a personal vehicle for work purposes. If they're in a fleet vehicle, same thing applies. But this is one I get more questions about than any other in this session, or really any other session that I cover, is people say, do I really have to give them a first aid kit if they're driving in the course of their employment, even if it's their own car? Yes, you absolutely do. It is found in section 16, subsection 2 of Regulation 1101, and also includes the contents of the kit required. When we talk about business purposes, we're not talking about commuting from home to work to home. We are talking about somebody, they drive to their office and they take their car, they go to see a client, they come back, they're getting mileage. That's driving for a work-related purpose, whether or not they get mileage. but it excludes commuting. And first aid treatment does have to be available at all times where workers are performing work. It's a best practice to have all of your managers trained and be sure that there is at least one manager on site at all times while work is being performed. That way, you've got yourself covered, you've got first aiders, they just need to go and talk to a manager. Some other best practices: know where your staff are working. Use your Outlook calendar system to be able to figure out who's in, who's out. Collect up-to-date in case of emergency information, including emergency contact, and ensure that staff are updating this regularly as they maybe move or, their personal situations, relationships change. Do have a procedure for managing well-being concerns if a worker is visibly in distress on camera or if they don't log into meetings as expected, including possibly getting emergency services to attend their work area. And you can use name badges to establish internal contacts should a medical distress situation occur in a hoteling station. One of the scariest things when I think about my partner going into his workplace is that he's sitting in a sea of people he doesn't know, and he hardly ever sees the same people twice. And if he suffers a medical emergency, the only thing that they've got is his little swipe badge with his name and face and on it to be able to tell who he is. If he could flip that badge over that says in case of emergency, manager's name, and or in case of emergency, you call this phone number, like this is the phone number for HR, that would be a huge improvement. All right, OHSA duties. All of these stay the same in a work from home hybrid, office environment. The supervisors still need to make sure that workers are working in a safe manner, that they're using any protective devices. That being said, you're not expected to babysit adults. We know that even in physical workspaces. Supervisors also have to advise workers of potential or actual dangers. I would provide some training to your supervisors on basic office ergonomics, on violence and harassment, on some of those office-based risks, so they're really prepared to have those conversations. Where so prescribed, they need to provide written instructions. There are only a couple of situations where the regulations require it, but I would encourage you to establish written programs for safety. And of course, supervisors still have to take every precaution reasonable. We have some great resources. We've got a couple of articles. Emily's going to share those at the end of the session with you. Do you use regular sign-offs and policies and programs to ensure due diligence? It's totally reasonable to expect somebody who's working in a home that their home is going to meet those basic electrical building fire code requirements. Also, establish some policies and programs that establish the roles and responsibilities for your workplace parties so everybody is clear on what they're doing and what their portion of this is. But Tova, what happens if our employees refuse to cooperate with the program? They want to go sit at the Little Tikes picnic table. They don't want to use the ergonomic tools that we provide. What do we do now? Workers still have to follow their own duties. They have to report hazards. They have to use equipment as provided and as intended by the manufacturer, as they're trained. They also have to report hazards. And this includes either defects, contraventions of the OHSA. All of these duties still apply to hybrid and remote work. And there's the list of things that workers are not allowed to do, including work in a manner that may endanger himself, herself, or another worker. So if workers don't want to cooperate with the programs, you can go send them back to the office. Location of work is, and despite the prevalence of work from home, and despite the prevalence of hybrid work, location of work is determined solely by the employer. There is no new rights for hybrid work or remote work that have been created by the pandemic that we just had. Like any other safety program, workers who fail to cooperate can be held accountable by the employer to ensure they're following practices, and they may be subject to discipline. And it's your discipline program like any other discipline. And if a worker fails to cooperate, the employer may reassign the person to work on site. Totally reasonable. So let's talk safety reps. I'm going to check in the chat. We've got somebody who's using a magnetic board to indicate which wardens or first aiders are in. I love that. That's excellent. We've eliminated our leaders and fire wardens. All of our staff are responsible to ensure floors are clear, and supervisory staff carry out more details. Amazing. I like it. We have a requirement for folks to attend in office twice per week. We have dedicated fire wardens, but since they're not always in the office, we expect employees to be able to self-sweep. That's excellent. Training and resources are provided. That's the key, Sam. I love it. This is great. We train triple the amount of wardens for hybrid days. I like it. We have online check-in location. Excellent. Those with mobility challenges check in with manager when they're in the office. This is all really good. This is why I love Safety Connection, because you can take a look at the chat and you can see what other people are doing. Nicely done, folks. When we're thinking about joint health and safety committees, it's all based on the number of workers who are regularly employed. And this includes full-time, part-time, casual, and hybrid workers who attend the office occasionally. The OHSA really is still based on like a one workplace geographical like address type model. And so there's a general focus around JHSC powers and duties that are focused on hazards inherent to the work site, the tools provided by the employer, right to refuse, inspections, that kind of thing. And employers without any workplace with 20 or more workers regularly employed, regardless of the organization size, are not actually required to have a JHSC. So if you are a tech company where you've got 150 workers who are distributed across Ontario, all work fully remote, and you've got like 3 IT staff that work on the site sitting in a space with like your IT closet, you would actually not need a JHSC or a health and safety rep at all. Do I think you should still have one? I really think you still should. Why? Because of the benefits of a joint health and safety committee. It really helps build that right to participate. I think there's still value in it. But in terms of what the bare letter of the law says, that is what it says. And when we look at what's regularly employed, this is a fact-specific determination. If the ministry ever shows up and says, hey, do you need a JHSC? They're going to be looking at the facts and details about the positions, and the client's workplace. They're going to be taking a look at, are they, will we think about like even people that are temporary, like temporary help agencies? They consider who's filling a position at a client's workspace as regularly employed if the position exceeds or is expected to exceed 3 months. So there's like the kind of like high turnover workplaces. That's how they think about it. They count the number of positions, though no single worker may have occupied that position for more than 3 months. That being said, when we look at regularly employed and touchdown spaces, whether they are third party or employer controlled, we want to consider the number of people that over a 3-month average and whether any of these people are expected to attend it for any reason. So as a good example, we have a small office in Mississauga. I attend it maybe at most twice a year. And I don't even know that I'm going to hit the twice this year. I am not regularly employed at our Creekbank office. Okay. However, if I was going in, let's say that I was going in like, once every couple of months, I would still be considered regularly employed there. Why are they going in? Are they going in to attend meetings? Are they actually sitting at a desk? Are they dropping off forms, picking up supplies, using printers, just picking up mail? Those are still work activities. And if they're still coming in on that regular basis, think about all of the people that showed up in a 3-month span. Count them all. And that number will tell you how big a joint health and safety committee you need and whether you need a committee. I would encourage you to create a JHSC anyway. If you do have a lot of workplaces or you're dealing with like the WeWorks of the world, you could apply for a multi-workplace exemption. You would need a terms of reference. You'd need a written exemption from the ministry. And you would need agreement of your employees, of your workers, that this is something that they actually want. And for touchdown spaces and for the, third-party workspaces, if you have 20 or more staff that are regularly employed in these spaces, you've got to establish a JHSC for that space. If you have 5 or more, you need a health and safety rep. I would still encourage you, as I just did a second ago, to have a JHSC anyway. It really does help support Great Place to Work initiatives, the right to participate, and it allows your staff to be able to talk about safety elements that go beyond just like inspect, meet, repeat. Often joint health and safety committees in hybrid work formats are talking more about policies and programs and things like working alone and emergency response and mental health that's still really valuable. They also can allow you to combat something I call it's only one day mentality. So you still need to do workplace inspections of your touchdown spaces if you hit that 5 or more over a 3-month period. They should be inspecting the touchdown spaces and hoteling style offices, even if, and this is even more important because of transiency. Because someone will get to a desk, it's not going to be in good condition, and they're going to be like, whatever, it's only one day. I'm just not going to book that desk next time. And they never report it. So you need to double down on being sure that your staff are really inspecting and doing a good job. Now, there is still if there's still a workplace where workers attend, even if it's only a few times a month, the workplace does need to be regularly inspected, either by your health and safety rep or your joint health and safety committee for that workplace. In terms of subcontracting, we did get this question from one of the advisory committee members that said, "Can I outsource my inspections? We want to just outsource them to our security company so that because we're having trouble getting our staff in to do the inspections." Absolutely, unequivocally, not a chance. Do not do this. Workplace inspections by third party would not meet the OHSA requirement because it undermines the internal responsibility system of oversight by the employer supervisors and workers working together. It undermines the Joint Health and Safety Committee's ability to recognize hazards, and it really massively undermines the right to participate in safety. So don't do that. Do we need to inspect home offices? Absolutely not. You do not. Do I recommend that you have people inspect their own home offices with our handy dandy template that will be sent to you at the end of the program? I absolutely do. For workspaces that are not controlled by the employer, if you have staff that are regularly employed, we've talked about that. If we're talking about itinerant workspaces like a coffee shop or a restaurant or like a hotel that you use just when you're traveling for work, no, because you would not have any of your staff regularly employed there for 3 months or longer. In terms of inspecting home offices, we do have a handy dandy checklist for you. What do? You send it to your staff, you have them do their own inspection, and then they work with their supervisor to address any concerns. It's a great opportunity to flag musculoskeletal disorders. It includes some culture pieces. It is them inspecting their own workplace in accordance with employer criteria. And yeah, highly recommend. In terms of violence and harassment, violence risk assessments are a requirement for all workplaces and organizations in the province of Ontario, but there's no obligation for an employer to conduct a separate risk assessment for every individual's home. A generalized risk assessment that talks about the risks of working from home and the risks of working alone or in a remote format where they're doing like site work would be considered as part of their organizational risk assessment. And from there, then you can look at policies and programs to proactively address risk. Now, that risk assessment also may identify areas where the organization determines that a risk is unacceptable, either from a security standpoint, information security, or just from a safety standpoint. I would not be surprised to see more workplaces forbidding workers from working in coffee shops or cafes, perhaps in particular locations, or they say, you know what, if you're not coming into the office to work, if you're not working from your home, we expect you to be in the office. We don't expect you to go work from like a Tim Hortons location for the entire day. If you don't want to work in your own home, we have a nice, comfortable hoteling station desk here thing for you behind a swipe door that's a lot safer than going and sitting in a coffee shop. And you can establish that in your policy if you want. In terms of third-party co-working spaces, you still would need to do a violence risk assessment for that space if you are requesting that staff use that location. I would include in the risk assessment all of the aspects of the co-working space, including the physical environment, any restrictions or access security access to the space, the fact that somebody may be working alone, at least from an organizational standpoint. They may be around other people, but it doesn't mean that they know those people or those people are prepared to help them if an emergency occurs. There are also, we also want to consider risks to workers and to our information or protecting valuable goods, and the location of that co-working space, such as if it were in a high crime area. What if someone decides to go to the US from Canada and work offsite in a hotel for a week? That's totally reasonable. Do you need to inspect it? No. Would I include out of country travel as a big picture item in your risk assessment for violence? I would. Yeah. And I would include it in the context of perhaps doing a little bit of a risk assessment for each trip before somebody goes. I've worked with some organizations where their staff are going to some dangerous places and they have a robust checklist that they go through. Sometimes it involves hiring armed guards that drive around in a convoy with them. Do I think you need that going into the United States? Definitely not. But if you were going to South Sudan to do work, I would definitely consider really robustly assessing the risk of that work travel. I would include just the travel component from a big picture standpoint, and then look from more of a granular standpoint, depending on where they're going. How does work outside of country apply to work permits, visas, tax purposes for employer? That is way above slash outside of my pay grade as a health and safety professional. I would suggest that you consult a labor lawyer, though, especially one that is more experienced in working in multinational contexts. If we set up a JHSC, are we supposed to tell the OHSA about it, or the ministry? So I think you're thinking about the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. If you're setting up a workplace that is a multi-workplace, if you want a multi-workplace exemption, you need to get it from the ministry. If you're just setting up a committee proactively and you don't need one because all of your staff are remote, no, you don't need to tell the ministry. We have 2 buildings across the road from each other, 60 plus hybrid. Do we need a JHSC for each building? You technically are supposed to, but you are absolutely the poster child for a multi-workplace committee exemption. I would highly recommend looking to seek that, especially if your staff travel between buildings for meetings and things like that, because you're going to have commonalities. And you effectively function as one big workplace. It's just across the street. So I would suggest a multi-workplace exemption for that. Can these touchdown people be part of the JHSC? They totally can, but if there are enough of them in the touchdown space, they actually need their own JHSC, or you would need a multi-workplace committee exemption to include the JHSC. Does this apply to Indigenous Independent First Nations? We follow federal regulations. No, federal regulations are different. They have different requirements. So Yvonne, feel free to hit me up after. I'm also an expert in federal regulations, but I don't have time to cover them before the session is over. All right, let's take a look at the chat. Let's talk domestic violence. So we have our provision in the OHSA that talks about the requirement that if an employer becomes aware or ought reasonably to be aware, so there's a trigger requirement, that domestic violence would likely endanger a worker to physical injury in the workplace, the employer shall take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances to protect the worker. But the employer has to have some control over the workplace in order to have a requirement. If they don't have control, how can you hold them accountable to a requirement? It doesn't make sense. So when it comes to domestic violence, you would have obligations to keep this person safe when they are on site. When they go home, if they're working from home, those same obligations do not apply. However, if you are seeing someone who is struggling with domestic violence, or if you suspect that they are, ought reasonably to be aware, please reach out with them with the utmost of empathy. Ensure that they have access to resources. Let them know that about job protected leave in the ESA. If they are experiencing domestic violence, you can connect them with an EAP program. One of the more common accommodations if someone is fleeing from an abusive situation is to have people working from home, but not working from their home, working from wherever they've just escaped to. if you have somebody and you can accommodate them in that way, that is a really good option for you. I would always say in the domestic violence sphere, lead with empathy. Know that you have obligations to protect them when they're at a work site controlled by the employer and more broadly when they are working, but that you cannot be responsible for them 24/7, nor are you responsible for them when they are working in their own home, because again, you just don't have enough control for that. You could offer that person the opportunity to work in the office every single day to get them out of their violent situation. That's also a really good idea. I wouldn't force them to, but I would definitely offer it as an option. Naloxone kits. Your employer may also be required to provide a naloxone kit in prescribed circumstances. So this is, again, where an employer either is aware, ought reasonably to be aware, that a worker could have an opioid overdose at the workplace where they're performing work for the employer. It means you have to provide a kit, make sure it's in the care of people who know how to use it. But again, when somebody is sitting in their own home, for the hybrid component of this, doesn't apply. So the employer would not have to provide a naloxone kit to every single person, or even to just, to make sure that you're somebody with a naloxone kit is sitting behind you. Not a requirement. Just a quick heads up on naloxone kits, though. Not every workplace has to have these. If you are in an office and you end up hitting that trigger requirement, someone discloses an opioid addiction issue, or maybe they've had a past overdose, or you're finding paraphernalia in the bathroom in a closed workspace, as opposed to like a public bathroom. Anybody could be dropping that there. You have reason to believe. And that's the point where you need a naloxone kit, but you don't need them for folks that work from home. So as we tail off our session here today, legislation to watch. And it came up right in the beginning of the chat, and don't worry, we're going to talk about it. A couple of questions in the chat, though. What if staff visiting a client's home? Should they have an naloxone kit or themselves to the client? That I can't tell you, at least from an OHSA standpoint, because it's not, the OHSA is very focused on a worker exposure, not client, not random person on a sidewalk in front of your building, not like customer in the bathroom. It's only if a worker is at risk. So the OHSA doesn't really answer that question. I would look at maybe discussing that with your public health unit, discussing that with your management. Also consider the activities. If you're a nurse, for instance, going and doing home nursing, maybe that's something that's appropriate, but I think that would be an organizational decision. And it's definitely nothing that the OHSA would dictate. So what does the Working for Workers 5 Act contain? And where are we at with the Working at Workers Act? Just a really big heads up, all of this is legislation to watch. This is not yet in force. Today is September 23rd, 2024. So if you are watching a recording of this legislation may be either further along or may have been passed. But as of today, September 23rd, 2024, this is where the bill is at. It's not yet in force. It's at the second reading. It's been referred to a Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs, and it may amend some critical legislation, including the OHSA, the ESA, the Fair Access to Regulated Professions and Compulsory Trade Act, Ontario Immigration Act, and the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act. So what does it actually talk about? And we're not going to talk about all the details. We're just going to talk about the ones that apply to like industrial establishments, OHSA, that kind of thing. It would amend, potentially, again, TBD, it would amend, the proposal is that it would amend the definition of industrial establishment to clarify that an office located in a private residence where a worker performs work under a telework agreement is not considered an industrial establishment. So it would be an office exempted from Regulation 851. And it would not be considered an industrial establishment for the purpose of the OHSE either. However, they would include some changes to workplace harassment to include that harassment including harassment virtually through use of communications technology is considered harassment. So this clarifies that the organization has to respond to reports of harassment, including if someone is working in their own dwelling and the harassment is coming in using communication tools. They're also looking at making some amendments to Section 3 of Part 1 application of the OHSA, where they're looking to say that despite subsection 1, this act applies to telework performed in or about a private residences or lands in connection therewith. So now there would be an expectation that, yes, the OHSA would apply to telework. And so this would bring the reporting requirements of Part 7 notices to telework as well. It is unlikely, though, to impact provision of equipment or inspections. There's also some proposed amendments around electronic postings. One of the better practices that came up in the chat, and I highly recommend as well, is to have a virtual health and safety board that you can use so that all of your staff, whether they're working from home or working in an in-office format, can use it. Now, right now, your offices still have to have a physical board. This would allow you to have an electronic format instead. Many workplaces right now have both. So this, again, TBD on this, not yet enforced. Still have your physical board in your physical offices. It would also allow, for the purposes of this act and regulations under this act, the information posted, you could provide these in electronic format, provided that, and by the way, the posting requirements that they talked about were the names and work locations of the JHSC, the summary of claims if on request, the act, any explanatory material, the health and safety starts here poster, the health and safety policy, violence and harassment program, policies, programs, and at a workplace with 5 or fewer, the inspector may order the harassment programs to be in fact in writing and posted. That's not in the OHSA yet. Again, TBD. These are all proposed changes. And that you would be able to use a virtual health and safety board, provided that you provide workers with direction on how to on where and how to access it, and the information is posted in an electronic format that can be readily accessed by workers in the workplace at all times. In workplaces that you don't have tech devices, maybe not the direction you want to go, but if everybody has a laptop and everybody has a smartphone, there is no valid reason why, if this legislation passes, that you wouldn't be able to do that. It then would formally recognize an electronic health and safety board in lieu of a physical board, provided staff are trained on how to access it and they have the technology to do so. And they're trained on how the technology works. All right, we are tailing our first session here today. I'm still here for questions. We're not done yet, but I would love to know which section was the most valuable to you. Feel free to drop that into the poll. Also, feel free to hop into the chat and tell us what the most valuable portion of this was. We do have some great resources that are available. All of the above, so useful. I'm so glad. We've been doing this one for a while. The duties. Notification for emergencies. Duties seems to be the number one so far. Application for private residences. I think that's the number one that I see a lot too when we do this session. So let us know in the chat what was your favorite takeaway, whether it was like a tidbit that I said or something that you're like, I didn't know. I'm always curious to see what people get out of our sessions. WSPS can always help you. We have some great new resources. We have some complimentary consulting that goes along with our free resources. We have more and more prepaid fabulous services. We have compliance assessments that we can come and help you with either virtually or in person at no cost. We have material handling assessments that we can come and help you with at no cost. We have training and certification, but we also have the WSIB Health and Safety Excellence Program that can help you get money back on your WSIB premiums just for building health and safety programs you should already have. Yeah, so I highly recommend taking a look at the Excellence program. It's kind of like your eighth grade math teacher giving you $20 every time you do the homework you were already supposed to do anyway. How much better at math would you be if that was your reality, right? Um, it's a fantastic program. Feel free to hit me up if you want to know more. That we don't need a JHSC if we have over 20 staff. If you have under 20 staff regularly employed, but you would still need a health and safety rep. Only have 2 or 3 people attend the office. Now, the question is, how often do they attend? And are there people that are sort of coming in once in a while? If it's like, if you have an office of like 3 people and that's it, and it's like the size of my living room, you do not need a JHSC for that. You are so welcome. My level of energy is off the charts for Monday morning. Love your animated way of presenting. Great and not so interesting topic, very informative. Thank you so much. Yeah. Welcome to the wonderful world of Safety Connection with Tova, where I'm practically blasting off my chair in a safe format where I'm actually still sitting on the chair. You are so welcome, Niall. Are we getting the slides? I think Emily covered that earlier. Fire and safety requirements were super helpful. Amazing. Thank you to everyone who shared it. Yes. That's part of what I love about this is I really love the sharing of other folks in the room because you're all dealing with this, right? Everybody's you've maybe tried some stuff and it worked, or tried some stuff and it didn't work. That's the best part about this. Are you putting your email in the chat? Absolutely, Emily can put my email in the chat. I think she always does, but yes, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You are so welcome. Thank you. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Feel free to book a call with me. Calls are always free. If you have any safety topic that you want to chat about or you're looking for support, we're here to help. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. I don't bite, and I'm always here to help. And that is the same for all the rest of our fantastic WSPS consultants who are located all across the beautiful province of Ontario.